Tonight, we're going to be wrapping up our season. Did you get the change in slide, Russell? Change slide? Did you get it for Zoomers? There we go. Yeah. We put on 5 educational programs this year. We started with having the talk with Carolyn Thayer, a local landscape designer of native plants. Plants for Shade, Taking a Cue for Nature from Elisa Babcock. She was wildly amusing, and I don't think there's a plant she doesn't love, which is so exciting to hear people say, oh, and this, oh yeah, this is my favorite. Gardening for Wildlife, we had David Mizajewski speaking on gardening for wildlife. We have his book back here. After, when we were having him as a speaker, I purchased 25 books and I'm selling them at a discount. So they're $15 a piece. It's a nice, handy kind of how-to, not a complicated guide, but a nice comprehensive book if anyone's interested. In August, we had Matthew Ross, the new director of the, and he was an absolute pleasure and treasure to have speak to us about design tips. And tonight we are really excited. Climate change is a controversial subject, and what do we do to adapt, and what do we do in our plants? And yes, I'm cutting in and out. Maddy and Ellie will be talking to us in just a minute about that topic. We have had 10 field trips this year. We were at Pete's Woods for 3 different Wednesdays in May, watching the succession of plants. If you haven't been to Pete's Woods in May, you don't know what you're missing. So put that on your calendar for next year. We had tours at the Sacred Grounds, which is a National Wildlife Federation funded project, Interlochen Arts Academy, Horticultural Center. We did have one rained out. Botanic Gardens was a very popular one. We've been to the Arcadia Marsh, and this morning we talked about invasive plants at Railroad Point. We also have staff booths at 2 special events. Every June, Blackcap Farm has an event day. The Conservation District used to have a plant sale and then said, silly for us to have a plant sale when we have a plant producer right down the road. So now we all go there, and it's a very fun and energetic day to be buying plants. So that's what we've been up to. I have done 9 presentations to other groups throughout this season, starting back in February, and Carolyn Thayer has done several, and she's teaching classes at NMC on landscaping with natives and shoreline protection. So I think this little tiny group here in Benzie and Manistee counties is having good outreach. So we're looking ahead. This is it, kids. We're done tonight. Eat all the cookies, drink all the lemonade, because we're done. I have 3x5 cards that I brought. And for those on Zoom, I would like you to use the chat. If you have program, field trip, or speaker ideas, suggestions that you would like us to consider, the board will be meeting the first 2 weeks in October. We can assess where we were and what do we want to do next year and where are we going with all this. You can always send us through our Gmail. I have been working all season to find a secretary, and by golly, we have Andrea Walworth up from Traverse City, who has volunteered to be our secretary. So we're happy. I hope Andrea's on tonight. Hi, Andrea. So there we are. It's been a very big year, a very fun year, and our first year here at Mills. And it has been really nice for us. We hope you have liked it as well. Now I will be unplugging. We'll have this little technical changeover as Maddy and Ellie Johnson. Maddy has been essential with the ATREP program of the assisted migration of trees, moving them from warmer climates because our climate is warming. And Ellie is our county forester up here. How many counties do you cover? 3 counties. So see the forester here in Grand Traverse, Leland, Benzie. So we have some pretty good tree people here tonight to talk to us about what can we do today on our invasive hike, looking at the beech trees, looking at the ash trees, looking at how many trees we're losing. And is this a way to also be more resilient? I mean, I don't know. we're going to learn. Thank you. Yeah, don't trip.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us tonight. So show of hands, who was at the invasives at Railroad Point this morning? Okay. Wow. That's serious commitment, like morning event and evening event. So thanks for coming out. And it sounds like, yeah, some of the things you saw will definitely be really relevant to what we have to share tonight. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm trying not to go too close so it doesn't get crunchy again. So yeah, my name's Maddy Baroli. I'm a climate adaptation specialist with an organization called the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. Technically, I'm employed through Michigan Tech University, and I was formerly an intern through the Michigan Forestry Assistance Program with Ellie's predecessor, Kama Ross, if anybody is familiar with Kama. So, yep, I spent a really great summer of 2019 with Kama, and that is when we launched this project, the Assisted Tree Range Expansion Project, which I'm going to say as ATREP probably for the rest of the talk because it is a mouthful. But yeah, that was with Kama in 2019, and we're gonna, for those of you who aren't familiar, we're gonna just give a intro to that project tonight and some of the ecological motivations behind that. So yeah, quick overview of our roadmap for tonight. We're going to talk about some basics on climate change impacts for the state, for our region, and then really spend a good chunk of time on introducing the project and going through the different tree species that we're planting and promoting through ATREP. So you'll learn a bit more about each of those species. And then we have some conservation district reporting. Really, it's reporting from folks who have been participating in this project over the past 3 or 4 seasons now. So we have some information to share from them. And we're going to just generally talk about some final thoughts on forest management as well. So, okay, jumping right in, we have some regional climate projections here for northern lower Michigan and kind of the eastern upper peninsula. So I recognize these are pretty difficult graphs to read. The point isn't really to read those graphs. It's just kind of showing what we're talking about here is shifts in temperature and precipitation for the region. These are coming from a forest ecosystem vulnerability assessment published by NIACS, the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. And so these are some of the highlights we have from this report on what some of these major changes are going to be through the mid and end of this century. So it's projected that temperatures, overall average annual temperatures, will increase between 2 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. Intense precipitation events are going to continue to become more frequent. And yeah, the precipitation, we're going to have increased precipitation, but the precipitation that we do get is going to be coming more and more events. Growing season is going to increase anywhere from a month to 70 days by the end of the century. So that's quite an extension of the growing season, which feeds directly into this next projection, which is that southern or more temperate species in northern Michigan are going to be favored by climate change. And some of our more northern species that are already at the southern part of their range are going to likely be suffering a little bit more and declining because of kind of reduced suitable habitat in the area. So that's some big picture trends related to temperature and precipitation. I do encourage you, I don't know who's taking notes here tonight, but we'll also share the slides, I'm sure, and everything is linked in here. But my organization publishes this interactive map online. So it's our Climate Impact Explorer, and you can, click on different regions. So there's a Impact Explorer for the Midwest, And this goes a lot more in detail with what each of those impacts are going to be. Pretty much all of the information is derived from this national climate assessment. So the 4th national climate assessment, there's a 5th one coming out again soon. It covers the whole country, and we pretty much just synthesize it. It's a pretty big report. We synthesize it into smaller, more bite-sized pieces to, yeah, help inform people. So yeah, just kind of another summary here. We're expecting increased winter temperature minimum. So that's a big deal. I kind of discussed how there's an overall increase in temperature, but it's increasing in each season as well. And so especially those winter lows not getting as low. So an increase in the winter minimum temperatures is having quite kind of like a cascading impact in terms of loss of snow cover and the ability for different pests and disease to kind of persist and not be killed back by some of those frosts in the wintertime. That's one of the effects of that. Again, this increased frequency intensity of extreme weather events, but at the same time, increased drought conditions. So that seems like kind of an oxymoron at first, that we could be getting more precipitation, but also more drought. It all kind of comes down to the timing of it. And I'm sure we've kind of experienced this already for a few seasons, right? We will have these like really dry, bone dry Junes when everything is kind of just trying to come up and you're like out there watering like crazy. But then we'll kind of have these deluge precipitation events that can really contribute to erosion along our creeks and actually kind of prevent water from recharging the water table as well, actually. So when you get really heavy rainfall, it doesn't always get soaked up the way a steadier rain does. So, and then, yeah, lastly, just. Is that you? You've got a loud voice.
So I don't think you won't hear me, but hey, that's how I get attention, I guess. So thinking about the rain events specifically, so 2 weeks ago, Leelanau County was hit from 2.5 to 7.5 inches. So that's what we're talking about. That like, even though Leelanau County is mostly sandy soils, right? Sandy soils got big old pockets to hold a lot of different nutrients and water and stuff. If you're getting so inundated like that, the land gets full and it's going to just surface run off, right? So it's those kind of events. We're going to get more rain, but they're going to be highly concentrated coming at us in like 12-hour chunks like that storm was. And so it won't actually be like helpful to grow things. Does that make sense? So as she was saying, like we are seeing it. Also, I won't turn that mic on again. So like rub your ears. I'm so sorry, but that's the last time that'll happen.
Yeah, that mic is for the audience, so when they're far apart and you're waiting.
I was hoping that I was far enough.
Yeah, right.
No, you went by the speaker.
Oh, snap. Okay. This guy. He's not to be trusted.
Technology.
Thank you. Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, very right. That just happened. And I heard, yeah, some parts of Leelanau got up to 7 inches. It was really crazy. So yeah, hopefully that all makes sense to everyone. And yeah, that kind of just, we like to use this term if you want to kind of help explain, maybe you have some climate change deniers in your life or something, but we use this term threat multiplier because it really isn't just a changing climate on its own that presents like such an existential threat. It's the way that it is amplifying existing stressors and disturbances, which are things that our forest ecosystems always have dealt with, right? That's a part of any ecosystem. But just the way that some of these disturbances are being amplified and happening more frequently as climate changes become more extreme, that's what's really kind of driving some of these more negative ecosystem impacts. This is a blank slide. Yes. Okay, so just some local examples that I'm sure many of us are familiar with, but kind of showing some of these different forest disturbances. We have some beech snap due to beech bark disease. in that upper left-hand corner. So a lot of the beaches are really starting to decay and come down now from that. A concentration of oak mortality due to oak wilt and benzene. This shelf cloud storm from 2015 that came through, and the picture below there is from Alligator Hill natural area. So yeah, quite a bit of and as you can imagine, some of the impacts of that are, you know, increased invasives being able to get a foothold during that, just generally kind of influencing the hydrology of that whole area, right? If you don't have the living trees doing what they're used to doing in terms of filtering water. And yeah, this is a Japanese barberry invasion in the forest understory. Again, an example of, okay, that's kind of a conflation of climate change and globalization, right? Global commerce and trade with, you know, some of these more foreign species being introduced, but then having the right conditions to really take hold. And then the adorable face of herbivory in our region, which is already really a pretty big problem in terms of forest regeneration. And it's unfortunate because they really love some species such as like white oaks, which are kind of projected to be a real climate winner. But yeah, the white oak regeneration has been pretty tough because they are preferred by deer. And this is a little tricky to model, but it is projected as well with a warming climate that deer populations will likely increase because, you know, they're able to have bigger families, have more time to forage for food, you know, that kind of thing. So they're growing. So yeah, what do we do about this? How do we crack this nut? Really what I focus on now at NIAX is working with different land managers and groups who are private landowners and others invested in managing forests on adaptation, which we define as the adjustment of systems in preparation or in response to climate change. And so this doesn't have to look like brand new ideas and things all the time. It can really build upon a lot of the actions we might already be doing on sustainable management, conservation, restoration, and stewardship. So just makes it, climate change just makes it that much more important for us to continue those actions. But there is also room for introducing some new practices. And I think for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of breeze. I'm gonna skip over that part. If anybody wants to nerd out with me afterward, they can, but I want to make sure we get to all of the species tonight. So what we're here to talk about, the assisted range expansion project. So a definition of assisted migration is the human assisted movement of species in response to climate change. So this is really kind of one tool in the toolbox of climate adaptation. And so there are some different types of assisted migration that are kind of outlined in the professional forestry world: assisted population migration, range expansion, and species migration. And really what those are, I can kind of just go through these. So population migration would be something like, okay, we have lots of eastern white pines, right, in our forests up here. Population migration would be going slightly further south to a certain point and retrieving some genetics of eastern white pines, but from a more southerly latitude, right? So you're just assisting the migration of that same species, but just more southerly genetics. Assisted range expansion, which is what this project focuses on, is more about, if you take a look at a map of Michigan, you'll see that a lot of tree species that are native broadly to Michigan will kind of have a cutoff around like the middle section of hand. Yes. Thank you, Cheryl. And so that is representing like the northern boundary of a lot of species range, right? And so, but there are a lot of those species are also kind of blocked in a way from having a natural migration by a lot of the activities we have going on in the middle of our state, including large-scale industrial agriculture and highways and development, right? So it's kind of unknown. There is evidence to show that like there is already some natural migration of tree species happening in response to our warming climate. But it's kind of hard to have like a clean experiment, right? Because we've altered our landscape so much. So anyway, range expansion is helping some of those species that are really just right at the cusp to expand their range. And then assisted species migration is a whole bag of worms. It's basically kind of almost like species rescue. If a species is maybe going extinct somewhere, like in a more extreme case, you know, moving that species to an area to kind of save it. So that can involve very large distances in some cases, and that's not really what we're talking about here today. So yeah, that brings us to ATREP. This is our logo and branding and website. And so please, yeah, share this far and wide. Again, the idea here is for this to be a community science initiative based here in Northern Michigan, focused on this concept of intentionally moving species in response to climate change. So we started this again in my internship in 2019 when I was working with CAMA. And so we've now had 3 seasons of sales through the conservation districts of the species that we're going to describe here. I would say it's gone really well. We've had really positive feedback and a really fun time coordinating this project. So here's some pictures from some spring plantings. And we always, of course, encourage people to protect their trees because we're not going to learn a lot about how these species are responding and doing if they get eaten right away. That's going to be like a, yeah, false death. So anyway, there's a map here as well with some of the participants who agreed to be displayed on a map. And so folks are basically measuring their trees each year after taking them home and planting them and reporting just some simple observations and measurements of their trees. And in some cases sharing their location with us so that we can kind of, yeah, spread the word about the project. And really, you know, some of the drivers here that we've touched on behind this project are to help increase ecosystem diversity, help our forest ecosystems adapt as certain species decline, and overall improve the resilience of our future forests. Recognizing that private landowners are responsible for over half of Michigan's forested lands. So you could have all the national parks, the national forests, and land trusts and whatnot doing this. Not that they are, some of them are, but you would still have, you know, 54% of our forested land in the hands of everyday, you know, citizens and landowners. So this project's really intended to engage folks in active stewardship of their land. This is also kind of helping us to ground some of these models around climate change and which species are projected to do well. At the end of the day, they're models. They're really well-informed models coming from these really great institutions. And I'm going to chat about them a little bit more. But there's no crystal ball, right? And you have to, we have to actually be doing some informed small-scale experimentation to really understand this better. And so what this looks like, Ellie will speak more to this, but in terms of the community science element, there are basically these 2 data forms that people, you can fill out online or in a form that you can give physically to the conservation district. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, yep, the question was whether or not certain cities and towns are doing this kind of thing as they're increasingly doing more native plantings? And the answer is really, it depends. Part of, again, the motivation behind this project is to create an informed citizenship that can kind of press for those things and show up and say, hey, I see you're doing this, you know, maybe think about including some of these species. I've been learning about how it's, you know, might make sense to include like 20% of these species or something like that. So I have seen for sure some range expansion style plantings being part of that, but it's not, I would say, the most common practice right now.
Can I answer that a little bit too?
Yes, please.
It is definitely happening in different spaces. I went down to Chicago just to be a young adult and do things in Chicago. And there was a park there on the lake that they had a lot of tulip trees and sweet gum planted. And they had all the signage of like these trees, like based on the same kind of computer modeling that Maddy and people smarter than me did to choose the species that we sell at our sales. They had all the same signage talking about all the same science. And so that's a city park in the middle of Chicago. Or like when I help with, there's an organization in Michigan called Relief Michigan. They do a lot of tree plantings across the state. And the different folks that work for that organization, they do some up here too. Like last fall, I helped with one in Northport. This October, there's one in Rapid City and in Sutton's Bay. So they're mostly doing plantings in Detroit and Grand Rapids, but they do a lot all over. And folks that work there ask me about different species selections, and they've been regularly using some of these same species for these reasons. So it is catching, which is cool. It's definitely like a component of larger plantings, which is sort of a better practice, right? Because this is an experiment. We don't want to put all tulip trees in a park because we'd be in the same problem as far as having a monoculture of something, right? So it's a part of a diversity of other Michigan trees.
Yeah, thank you.
And what's missing? What areas
Mm-hmm.
are you not getting through to?
Do we want to save it for Q&A, or do you want to go?
Well, so the question was like, what kind of support we need for, or like what support are we lacking from different community members and landowners and stuff? We will, the part of my talk with this, because I work for the district now, so I've like Maddy threw the ball and I'm running with it. So you'll get to it here in a little bit.
Yeah, good question, for sure. I'll add on St. Paul, thank you. St. Paul, Minneapolis also has a large scale planting along the Mississippi River at one of their big urban regional parks, where this is a strong theme for them. And when Ellie says, you know, it's an experiment, right? I want to reiterate, because I know you're all a really informed audience, that it is not an experiment that we're as worried about in the sense of like, these species like having invasive qualities, because really a lot of these are just large deciduous trees that will not be flowering and putting out fruit for like 20 to 25 years in some cases. And so there are some trees that can behave invasively, for sure. They are not included in this. And really at the end of the day, I would say it's an experiment in the sense that you're investing money and time and resources into planting these trees. And if they didn't do well, that's obviously a loss. So, okay. Okay, so here we'll get into the species. So the process of selecting, we just selected 6 species to start with, right? Because these are species that we were including in the spring seedling sales. So we couldn't really like blow up the whole form and add like a bunch of new species. So I wanted to start kind of small. And these are the kind of criteria that we went with for selecting them. So each of these species we're going to go through have been modeled through this tool called the Climate Change Tree Atlas, which has been developed by landscape ecologists with the U.S. Forest Service. Through that modeling, they either have projected new habitat or a projected increase in suitable habitat. So what that means is they're either not here yet, they're right on the cusp again with their range, and they're projected to have new habitat in this region, or they are here, but in low numbers, kind of low population, and they're projected to have this increase in suitable habitat. So the key here is the projection is about suitable habitat, not how many trees are going to be there in 20 or 30 years or 40 or 50 years. It's about how suitable are the conditions in this place going to be for the conditions that we know these tree species like, right? So it's kind of whether they're a good puzzle match. The other filters that we use, so this was Kama, myself, and then Tom Adams, another employee at the Leelanau Conservation District, that finalized the list. These were some of the other things we thought it was important to consider. That they are not a preferred deer browse species, which is quite difficult to find. And I won't say that all of these trees are deer resistant by any means, but obviously some are yummier than others. We wanted to also think ahead about the Asian longhorn beetle. So if you've heard of this pest, it has quite a few host species actually, and does quite a bit of damage, unfortunately, including on maples. And it really kind of surrounds us in Wisconsin and over to the New England states as well. So it's kind of a matter of time. There's, of course, programs to kind of help catch and mitigate that if we do start seeing that pest. But we wanted to choose species that weren't as vulnerable to that. We wanted to provide a good distribution of options for trees that are happy in either sun or shade, wet conditions, dry conditions, more forested areas or open fields, just knowing that everybody who's buying seedlings is going to have different, reasons for planting on their site. They all provide distinct, cool, different wildlife benefits. And then we also wanted to include 1 or 2 good options for more urban or yard trees if people were interested in that. So with all that in mind, I'm going to skip over. So I'm going to share sort of a summary table from that climate. Okay. I think I had a recording on that slide. Sorry. So these are the species that we started with ATREP. So tulip poplar, shagbark hickory, sassafras, black gum, swamp white oak, and hackberry. We added sycamore this past season, and some of the districts have been doing bur oak. We're gonna definitely make sure bur oak is continued to be offered as well. So we're going to jump into kind of popcorning on describing each of these species.
It's also something, we got a slide of this too. So all these different species, the districts that I cover again are Leelanau, Grand Traverse, and Benzie. So those are the districts that are part of this project. Not every district offers every species. It's also limited by the nursery stock available, right? Because we're generally buying our seedlings from the same places. So as you're looking at order forms in the spring, you may not be able to see every single one of these, but between those 3 districts, all of these are offered. So just putting that little baby disclaimer in there. But anyway, tulip trees, some of my favorite trees. I was just down in South Carolina for grad school and I saw these everywhere. And then I came up here and there's not as many. So I'm very jazzed that we're trying to bring them up this way. Some people call these tulip poplars, which bothers me. They're not related to poplars. They don't behave ecologically like poplars. They're actually in the magnolia family. I mean, look at that cute little flower, right? It's a little cup. It's kind of like a lime green, orange color. So they support pollinators. They are awesome for forest openings, canopy gaps. So oftentimes when I'm walking with landowners recommending this tree, it's whenever they had a forest that had a lot of ash in the canopy, that these are really awesome replacements for some of those same spots. So something to consider if you have those kind of forests. I saw that and it made me very happy.
I think the slide shows like on its own timing or something. Yeah, right. So next is shagbark hickory. It is, yes, known for this distinctive shaggy bark, which I just love. It's also known for its the large edible nuts you see there, which are really loved by wildlife and humans. Apparently you can press them and make a really fantastic cooking oil. So I want to try that sometime. They will often grow quite slowly. So hickories and oaks put down a large taproot first. So they're busy in their first couple of seasons, really growing that root into the ground. And that's when they'll spring up. But they also can grow in the shade for a while, this species. And then kind of when they get a opening in the gap, a gap in the canopy, they'll respond to that sunlight. You saw the bat pop up here. So bats also really love this species because they will they'll sleep under the bark. They'll kind of rear some of their young under that shaggy bark, which I just think is so cool. So it's kind of like a natural bat house, but it will take a while if you're buying a little seedling from the conservation district to get to that level. And for each of these species too, you'll see we have which other species they commonly associate with listed. So that might help you kind of think about your property.
I like little bat sleeping bags, all these little separations. Swamp white oak. That one is having swamp in the name. I don't know. It enjoys a wider range of soils than what the word swamp might give it credit for. It's a very good yard tree. It's where I see it, it's happiest as far as landowners that have planted it already. And as Cheryl was talking about some Doug Tallamy, right? So oaks are heavy hitters for wildlife keystone species. They support a lot of mammals and bird species. They're supporting bird species because they support a lot of insects, right? So whenever you can plant an oak, just know that you are supporting such a wide breadth of the food web that is around your house. So always an awesome choice for that regard too.
Okay, hackberry. This is one of those that we suggest as well as a yard tree. It doesn't have to be, but this is one of those that qualifies as a good, more urban tree. You'll see that one's planted in a parking lot. There's quite a few in the Oriana 10th Street parking lot in Traverse City. You'll start to see them around. But they are a medium-sized tree. Again, a really distinctive bark that you can see here. It's kind of corky and warty. And these are really supportive of wildlife in those later fall and early winter months when most things have really kind of gone dormant. These droops that they have will persist on the tree. And so I'm not so great with birds. Is this a cedar waxwing? Okay. Yes. So I should be better with birds because, and birds and fish. Yeah. It's pure luck. So yeah, they are loved by a lot of different songbirds and critters that need that late season food source.
Black gum is more your wetland tree. It is one that I recommend for wetland edges, but it is pretty flood tolerant. It can withstand some pretty wet feet. It's got such awesome fall color, like it turns that bright red. So sometimes people are planting non-native things because they want that extra color or that bluer thing or that purple thing or whatever. This is a very awesome choice if color is the aesthetic that you're going for. But again, so this is more of a wetland tree compared to some other ones we've talked about.
Gonna say what purple option, but then I remembered Norway maple. This sycamore we added this year, which I'm really happy about. I love sycamores. So this is quite a large, long-lived, oftentimes upwards of 200 years, as well as fast-growing tree. And it has, we just love trees with good bark. I think it has this really cool kind of camo bark. This, you've probably been along riverbanks where sycamore is growing. So it is, shade and flood tolerant, loves those floodplain areas, and will also grow pretty well in disturbed or polluted soils. In terms of wildlife, not a ton of things eat its seeds in these big seed pods you see, but beavers and muskrats do, and the habitat it creates provides areas for different waterfowl and game birds. And so another good option for wetter areas.
And then bur oak again. Oaks, awesome for so many different things, so many caterpillars. The last that I'd heard Doug telling me talk, 900 some caterpillar species are supported by members across the Quercus genus, right? So if you, again, want to support a lot of organisms in your food web around your home, these are always a good choice. Of all the different species up to this point, the bur oak likes having the driest soils. Like it can withstand some really well-draining sandy spaces. So again, when thinking about when I'm using the word experiment, it's always an experiment when you plant something, you know, because I am selling people trees, I'm selling people plants all the time and they lose them even though they did everything right, right? So it's just like every year's a new year. So whenever you're planting something, it's just a try on your soul that it's going to make it, right? So when I say experiment, that's what I'm talking about. But we're not going to talk about sassafras because up to this point, so we've been selling these actually for 4 years, 2020 till this past spring. Going by, again, that this is a community science project, I am listening to what people report back to me as far as how well these species are doing. And I've got a lot of like negative feedback about how sassafras has fared. I don't know if it's necessarily a nursery issue. I've done some extra research and then maybe it's not the best choice for transplanting. It's better with seeds. But so we don't want to get you all jazzed about that little dinosaur foot tree because we're not offering it with this project. But all those other ones are. And if you want to get started with this project, because again, Maddie's the one that sort of got this train going and I'm still driving it down the track. So I work for the conservation districts, right? So I'm part of the forestry assistance program. That's a grant through MDARD. So I'm a free resource for private landowners to offer technical assistance. So I'm generally in people's woods, very hard to get a hold of because I'm already walking with someone among their trees. But if you're trying to get a hold of me, email, or I also have a cell number and I've got cards in the back on that table, right? So you can chat with me about it. And a lot of my visits in the spring are what to plant where for people. So they're like, I'm considering ordering some stuff from the district, but I don't know where in my yard different things would work. So connect with me, order trees through the districts. All 3 districts have slightly different timelines, but in general, for a spring seedling sale in February or March, you can submit something online to either Benzie, Grand Traverse, or Leelanau. Again, everyone's order forms look a little different. We offer slightly different things. And then, so you place an order with us and then your seedlings will come in. Benzie is like the 3rd week of April. So I believe that's Earth Day. I get them mixed up because I have so many events on either day, so it doesn't matter. But Benzie's seedlings are available that 3rd week of April. And then Grand Traverse and Leelanau seedlings are available the last week of April, which I think is Arbor Day, right? That's why I don't really know which one's which. But when you've got your trees in the ground, let them, please protect them also. Please put tree tubes on them because a lot of the feedback I get is like, they were doing good and then a deer ate them. I'm like, okay, I've talked to you about this. So please protect your seedlings. They're going to get munched on and I don't want that to happen. Not very deer resistant. And then I will send reminders every once in a while about these order or data forms. What I want from folks is I've got 2 different Google forms that I've made. The first one is just telling me who you are. You fill that out once. So then I just sort of have you in the system to send you updates and information about things. The second Google form that I've made is a checklist for each tree. That second form automatically takes your email, so I know who you are when you're submitting stuff. But I want you, if you're planting them in a line, if you're planting them in your woods, to go back out, find your trees, and let me know. I've got like 5 questions on there. So it's the year you bought the tree, the district you got it from, the species that it is it alive or not? How tall is it, and any other notes, right? Some of those questions will sort of answer if it's a nursery stock issue or if it's actually like the species not being a good choice for our area. But I recommend people, if they're buying stuff in the spring, to go back out in the fall and then the following spring, like just to check a couple times a year so they can let me know how they're doing. Because again, you'll influence what I'll keep selling at our seedling sales. Yes. Depends on the species and depends on how happy the tree is going. Yeah. Sorry to people on Zoom. How long do you need to keep a tube on for your seedlings? So if a tree is having a really good time and it's shot out of there, right? Don't remove that tube right away. Because when it's little and it's inside the tube, it is serving as strictly protection. It doesn't want to get munched on by a deer, right? But it's got that filtered sunlight that's going through that plastic to hit the seedling. So that seedling is going to want to grow up. It's going to get out of the tube to get that full sunlight. So it's kind of going to look like a scraggly teenager. It's going to be a little too thin. when it first pops out of the tube, that tube is then acting as much structural integrity as it is protection for that seedling. And if you remove it too early, that seedling might just plop over in the next like heavy rain or wind, right? So it's more of a girth thing, not a height thing. So that means that you can leave a tube on there potentially for like 4 or 5 growing seasons. So I hope you like those white tubes and how they look because you're going to need them.
Watercolors. I don't know. There are some that are being, made that are like more of a green color. Yeah, the white tube. It's worth it though. It's worth it. So this is just a quick plug. Oh gosh, I'm forgetting his name, who makes these awesome videos through Nature Change. Anybody heard of him? Local, like small film producer, and he makes these great clips and interviews people about local conservation efforts. So that's Nature Change. If you just were to go to naturechange.org, you could search Assisted Tree Range Expansion Project and you'll find this video. And then, we've gotten really great press throughout the duration of this project. Kind of started with just little stories in the Record Eagle and Northern Express. And we had a Detroit Free Press article last fall. It went out on Labor Day, and I didn't get a physical copy, which I was really sad about because I was busy doing Labor Day things. And then I tried to find it, but I couldn't. So anyway, the ATREP was featured in this Detroit Free Press article, which was a roundup of a bunch of different kind of assisted migration type efforts across the state. This bottom article was an MLive article, and then these others we weren't really featured in, but I just wanted to show that in general, this is a topic that's getting more and more attention. There's all kinds of great more formal, less formal experiments of this sort happening across the country. So I will happily send out a list of links to folks in a follow-up email.
Okay, so now let's talk about some of the actual data and how it's been going thus far, right? So we've been selling seedlings since 2020 for Benzie-Leland and Grand Traverse. This is just to give you an idea of how many of these different species that we are handing to landowners and getting in the ground, which to me is very exciting. I love handing people trees. Even though I was just complaining about Earth Day and Arbor Day, it's just a very busy time, right? But it's very exciting because I love giving people trees. Those are my favorite visits about what to plant where. But so again, these numbers are kind of skewed because not every district offers all of these species. So shop around, it's fine. We won't get hurt. We're all teammates. But not everybody's going to offer all these species. So, like I said, I got those 2 Google forms. So a couple of these first ones, you see that it says on there that there's 31 responses. So this is the contact one. So this is who's participating in it. In this, we changed the way we collected data this past year to make it a little more streamlined. So these are the folks that are contributed this year. They're mostly, as far as this, getting them from Grand Traverse makes sense. Of my 3 districts, that's the largest one, right? And so again, where are you planting your seedlings? Makes sense. A lot of them are ending up in Grand Traverse County because most people are participating, at least answering this, are planting them where they live. Though it's interesting to me that some people are scooping them and they're planting them in properties that they own elsewhere. So I'm curious to hear how those seedlings are doing. And so then these following ones are more from the data collection one, right? And so again, we changed the data this year. Makes a lot of sense to me that a lot of my responses are from 2023 seedlings, like folks that bought them this year, because I'm handing them the info to submit their data to us. And then what species? People are buying a mix, which I find very satisfying. That's not just a whole bunch of one thing, though. Tulip tree seems to be bought a lot, and I don't know why. It's not like I'm telling everyone it's my favorite tree, and it's very cute. But there's a lot of tulip trees that are getting out. I just find this part so funny that working with the public and asking them for information, they're still going to want to correct you and say that they bought a whole other species that you don't sell or doesn't exist. So whenever you do community science, you're always going to have some adventurous answers. Yeah, sorry, the swamp white gum, right? We didn't rattle that off. That's not a thing.
It's a mashup of swamp white oak and black gum, probably.
But that person told me about his 5 swamp white gums and that they're doing good. I'm like, heck yeah, dude. Awesome. I don't know what that means. But anyway, they are at the moment alive. But again, most of these responses are about 20, 23 trees. But still, it's good to know that there's a lot of caring people out there that have babied their trees along, because this summer was kind of rough to be a baby tree, right? And even past this, so some data is better than no data, right? But I get a lot of just people talking to me about how they're going. So I only have so many numbers to show you, but I could show you a lot of different landowners as we're walking around their woods, like, oh yeah, I planted this. Like I was on a site visit last week. This woman lives closer to Glen Arbor. This is a tulip tree she bought in 2020. It's 10 feet tall. She put it, yeah, it was a seedling that someone at the district handed to her. And she put her tulip trees in canopy gaps, and they have been loving it over in Glen Arbor. So I don't know what's happening in Glen Arbor, but they love tulip trees. And so again, with the idea that I am listening to people when they're telling me this stuff, either by data or speaking to me. So that's why we're not offering sassafras anymore. I just had a lot of people saying that they didn't make it any of the summers that we did offer them. So it's like, all right, we don't need to keep trying to push that as an idea. And the three that aren't necessarily like selling the best, but trees that are actually doing the best in our environment at this moment are that tulip tree, swamp white oak, and common hackberries, which is great. Some of these other ones though, like I said, we just started offering sycamore last year. We offered bur oak for the first time this year. So I'm curious to see how some of these other species will fare over the next few growing seasons. In general though, as I said, I get a lot of notes on that data collection one where it's like, this tree was doing really well. And then it got munched by some deer. And I'm like, we talked about this. You were gonna buy fence or something. So if you're buying seedlings from us, regardless of what they are, if they're sugar maple, white pine, even spruce, I don't know. But I get a little stressed about our deer problem in this area, and I don't want people to keep buying trees from me that we're all gonna lose. It just doesn't seem worth either of our time to do that, right? So please protect your trees.
Quick note on that. Yeah. Just because we did definitely mention tubes as an option for that. And for some people that can be distasteful, even though it's really important. Another option is to do a small exclosure, a small deer exclosure. So using some kind of taller, usually metal, kind of like garden wire situation to, especially if you do have canopy gaps in your forest where you're thinking, hey, this might be a nice spot. I see enough sun coming through here. The conditions are right. Maybe I lost some other trees. You could do a small deer exclosure and plant a couple of seedlings in there. And then that's going to be much more natural looking in terms of seeing through the forest. So.
Yeah, putting a fence around it, like making a pocket. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's all saying my neighbors and more old farmland because it did not want to soil, but it's got the soil also.
Right.
So this is interesting.
I have a really loud laugh and I'm like, oh God, we don't need to copy the mic. Yeah, and there's like, whenever I say please protect your trees, tubes is not the only choice. Whenever I do these site visits with folks about what to plant where, there are other options. It's just very much, all these conversations I have with folks are maximizing your own resources, right? Your own limited time and effort and energy and monies to be doing stuff and what makes sense for you and the trees that you're getting. So there are more options than just tubes. Another big disclaimer, but we can talk about that more too, right? Maddy talked a lot about this already. Assisted migration of any type, as far as considerations to think of, it's part of an overall management strategy. So whenever I am talking to people about these species and they're talking about what to plant where, I'm not just talking about ATREP species. I'm talking about what makes sense to the soil types and the water availability and the sunlight that they've got, right? So just focusing on these and like transitioning your forest to these other species, I don't think is the smartest idea either. Like, we're mostly in northern mesic hardwoods, right? Which are their own diverse forest types in themselves. So we're just adding to what's already here and being awesome already. So that second bullet, that pay attention to local site conditions, even if something is your favorite, some type of species, if it's not going to grow at your house, please don't buy it, right? Like if you've got really sandy, well-drained soils, there are oodles of species that love that space. Or if you live near a wetland, there are so many things that like hanging out there. I've got a lot of visits that are tree health ones, right? And someone's concerned that they're seeing extra insect activity or different things. As Maddie was talking about, like a threat multiplier, it's usually an environmental condition that's giving a tree a hard time first, and then the different biotic agents like insects and diseases and things are capitalizing on that stressed out tree. So matching your conditions is much more important to me than potentially anything else as far as planting stuff in your space. Yeah, we sort of already talked about this in other spaces. But the main thing as far as just like planting a seed for you all to like think on, the assisted population migration one, right? So that was the idea of just taking southern genes or just genetics from a different space into our space. Our districts buy our seedlings from different spaces. And then those different spaces, as in like different nurseries, those different nurseries are sourcing their seeds from different spaces too, right? And so I got a lot of questions up the supply chain from me to those people about where are we sourcing all this stuff, because we may inadvertently be doing a lot of assisted population migration already, which I would argue would probably be a good thing, right? Whenever I'm handing you a bundle of sugar maples, they may have come from Alpha Nursery, which is now located by Holland, Michigan, New Holland, Michigan. And that's going to have slightly different genetics than our sugar maples that are up here at this latitude, right? So regardless of how folks feel about extending the ranges of different species, we may inadvertently be moving the genetics of different populations of the species we have up here around, which may just that extra genetic diversity may serve as its own positive, regardless of utilizing some of these species or not. So there's something to think about. Again, that whole some data is better than no data. So if you planted some trees, you can't totally remember where they are, different things, like please call me up or write me an email about it, because I want to know how they're doing, even if it's just like a little offhanded comment. Because again, I've listened to people for any of the species we sell, honestly. If you give me feedback about different nursery stock or different things, I am hearing you. And so the next fall, in the fall, when we start placing our orders for spring seedling sales, I want to cater to what other people have been seeing and witnessing and telling me about when they're planting and watching their seedlings grow. And this, as an idea, might extend to other conservation districts. Leelanau Conservancy buys a lot of seedlings from the districts, and I'm handing them a lot of ATREP trees. So does Grand Traverse Land Conservancy. So it's just kind of neat that we have all these different partners in our area that are managing a lot of land that are also buying into this tool. So you are not alone when you try to attempt this kind of science experiment, right? You have a lot of like-minded people trying this out with you.
And speaking of, I'm not gonna do that. The Congregational Summer Assembly, are folks familiar with them? Yeah, in the area here. So they've been a great partner. So we 2 summers ago did a planting of, they weren't seedlings through the conservation district. They ordered some bigger stock because they have quite a few forest health problems there at that property. And so they're really wanting to be super intentional and get a jump start on helping some of that understory be a species mix that is maybe going to fare a little bit better than how their overstory is right now. So if you're ever in the neck of the woods over there, I'm sure they would be happy to show you around, or you even just, it's like adjacent to the baseball field, like across from their clubhouse. There are some really cool different oaks planted. We planted some pawpaws as well. And yeah, so the Congregational Summer Assembly, check out their ATREP plantings. I'm going to not do any more of these. These are kind of more of my slides I do with like land manager audiences. But since we kind of just ended on this idea of, you know, where we're getting our tree seedlings from for the conservation district seedling sales and sourcing from these different nurseries, this is a shameless plug for my business that I just started. I've been growing a lot of these species. And I've been going down, I was actually just in Indiana yesterday, and I was collecting chinkapin oaks and pawpaws and black walnuts, and I've been growing them at the historic Barnes Park in Traverse City. So like in the Commons area, I have a community tree nursery plot. And so, yeah, I'm growing that right now, and I'm tapping into kind of a network of friends and volunteers, who are also helping grow out some of these species, just knowing that I don't have much capacity right now. And I'm also hoping to get folks to like share seeds. If you have a tree that is really like going through a big mast year or something, right? Like the oaks and walnuts and hickories are all really happy this year and producing a lot of nuts. So I would just be happy to get in touch with anyone who would want to share some seed. And I'll be continuing to grow those trees out, and I've been vending them at some different markets and such. And I might be at the Sarah Hardy Farmers Market next spring. And yeah, kind of integrating all this educational material and programming into that effort as well. So please stay in touch if that's something you're interested in. And this is our kind of sloppy last contact slide. We were just editing before this, but I think you have both of our emails here. Ellie Johnson at macd.org. You can reach me at salixcollective@gmail.com. And yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll do Q&A now. Yeah.
I'm not gonna control this other microphone. Your business. You got any questions?
Yeah.
We covered some while we were talking at you for a while.
I stay far enough away. Yep.
Yeah,
It works.
wait. I'm sorry again for rattling all of your brains earlier.
My comment is about the survivability of the seedlings. My husband and I have been buying them since '07, and we buy from anyone. I just pick a different conservation district. So I've done Manistee and Benzie and Leelanau and Grand Traverse. We bring them home now and put them in pots. And we nursery them for either a season or a year or two. And we have a much higher success rate of letting those bare roots grow in a pot, where we can put things like fishing line around them to keep the deer browse. We put them all together. We water them. They get much more TLC. And then we can put them in the ground. And our property is full of these trees, and I give them away all the time. So we've been really successful buying the 5 or 10 and babying them. So I think that might be helpful.
The pot idea is definitely a good one to especially get them that first summer, right? It's just really hard being a seedling. They got ripped out of the ground that spring, and then to reestablish and deal with drought stress, sometimes 4 or 5 times throughout the summer. Sometimes what I struggle with folks is they're going through something like NRCS cost share funding. And so they're buying 1,000 seedlings at once. And so some of that kind of stuff, when you hit a quantity like that, some of these folks are transitioning agriculture land. And so they've already got a big fence up. So that's another kind of those deer exclosure things, which is awesome. But folks who are buying, I often have folks who are buying like 25 to 50 seedlings. They'll even do that many in pots or like in a tight little row right behind their house, and give them a couple summers like right up by their home to then sprinkle them throughout their woods. And yeah, that seems to increase the likelihood of survivability so much for those people.
I did. You had mentioned earlier when you were talking about the weather changes and maybe some torrential rain that doesn't soak into the ground, you know, like our steady rains do. Do you anticipate building any sort of a rain catch basin or anything like that as part of helping address climate change?
Yeah, there are so many fun conversations to have about what you can do on your property that kind of fall under the umbrella of climate adaptation, again, with like assisted migration just being one. So I don't geek out on this as much as some of my colleagues who have more of a background in hydrology. But yeah, some of the main things people are doing are upsizing culverts, right, to handle that increased flow. I definitely think for if you have like a species that you are concerned about being extra sensitive to dry conditions or drought, definitely like planting those in an area where like being intentional about planting it in a part of the landscape where water is going to sit more is a great idea. Maybe even, yeah, like building your planting hole in such a way where like a lot of times when people mulch, which we definitely recommend, if you're not really in as much of a canopied area, don't do, you know, the volcano mulch thing around the tree trunk. You wanna build it out and kind of create that like catch basin in a way. So that's really great to do with different mulches. Planting on like northern slopes. And so if it's a species that you're concerned about maybe being extra sensitive to a lot of sunlight, a lot of heat and drought, planting in more northern slopes and northern areas on your property is a good idea as well. So. Mhm.
You have Zoom questions?
I think what we had is that Linda had suggested that Maddy Gmail address is incorrect.
So no, yeah, because she's the one starting that like Salix Collective. So this feels like it's gonna start like yelling again. I'm a little stressed. I don't know. What I was also gonna say for like water stress trees, so the same idea with like planting on northern slopes. If you've got a canopy gap, planting on like if you're looking like aerial imagery of that gap, planting on the southern edge of that, because you're going to get, if it's like in a forest, right? So you've got this big old pocket in it, because that's going to receive the shade from its neighbors immediately to the south. So there's a way to work within your forest in that way too, of utilizing the other trees that are already there.
Be a good idea to have Ellie out if possible to help you look at your canopy gaps and maybe even bring a few flags along or something, and she could help you and be like, okay, this might be the spot where I would plant something. Yeah.
Other questions from the audience? Yep.
Oak disease and oak wilt and red oak disease and other, conditions that are affecting oak trees.
Yeah, there are a few different. Yeah, sorry. So repeating the question, hello everyone on Zoom, talking about oak diseases and different threats to oak species. So there is this kind of a catch-all term, and so oak decline is a thing. You can look it up on the Forest Service and read about it. There is with the history of like Michigan in particular, right? So by 1880s, a lot of this state was clear cut because we built Detroit and Chicago. We had a lot of species grow back up in that space. We also suppressed fire for about 80, 100 years throughout where fire was endemic to this area. And so you had a lot of woody plant encroachment in spaces and really dense forests that weren't historically there. Some of those trees are now adult trees that are 100-some years old, and they're starting to decline due to that like long-term competition stress between each other, that we just suppressed a lot of natural disturbance. So, and that's a huge generalization for everyone in the room, but oak decline is a thing. To me, it sort of sounds just like a catch-all term of like, nah, I don't know what's wrong with your oak. It's in decline, but it is very much a diagnosis. The soundbite about oak wilt, which I don't know how familiar everyone is, if you've already heard me talk about this, it's a fungal disease. It impacts the vascular systems of oak trees, so like their circulatory system, right? Which is immediately underneath the bark of an oak tree. That sap smells really awesome for a lot of native insects, right? Again, oaks are those keystone species for supporting a lot of things. So when an oak is injured and that sap layer is exposed, because only the outside rings of a tree are alive, right? So that will attract different native insects looking for a snack, right? They may or may not be carrying spores of this oak wilt fungus, which the Latin is escaping me, but it's probably because it's 8 p.m. and I'm not going to think of it. Regardless, but they may be carrying these spores. If they get inside that red oak tree, it can kill that tree in a matter of weeks between the way that fungus can clog up the vascular cells and the tree's own immunoresponse, trying to compartmentalize it from spreading throughout the tree will get girdled between both those things happening at once. So what that means is it can't pull water from its roots to get up to its leaves where it needs it for photosynthesizing, right? So it's going to look like the houseplant you forgot to water and all of its leaves are going to droop. It might not drop its leaves right away, but it'll, you know it when you see it. It very much just gives up and they're hanging there, right? What is insidious about oak wilt, besides the fact it can kill an oak tree, a grown 100-some-year-old oak tree in a few weeks, is once it's in the vascular tissues of that oak tree, oaks are readily root grafting with their neighbors, with other oak trees, to share carbohydrates and different resources, but they can also share disease that way, right? So when you get one oak that, again, was just like injured, attracted some insects, carried the spores got in the vascular system, that tree dies. That fungus then can spread to its neighbors through the root system. So oftentimes when I'm called out to a site where someone thinks they have oak wilt, it sort of looks like a bullseye where you've got like a few trees in the middle that all the bark's peeled off, like they died like 5 or 4 years ago. Then you got the next layer where there's still a lot of bark intact, but also dead trees. And then you got the ones outside that are starting to flag. And there's a whole bunch of different managements and strategies for that. As far as dealing with if you've got oak wilt on your property, which if you think you do, please call me, because that's a lot of my visits in the summer. But the main thing to be proactive is please don't injure your red oaks between, at the bare minimum, April 15th and July 15th. Nothing in nature can read a calendar, but that is just the time window that MSU is saying that that's the perfect storm of conditions as far as like highest insect numbers, most insect activity, your trees are their most active, and there's the most spores being produced out in the landscape, right? So please, 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 please do not prune a red oak. Don't injure a red oak during at least those months. After July 15th, again, nothing can read a calendar, right? It starts to taper your overall risk. The risk is still there. The best time to do any work on an oak is in the off season. So a lot of tree care providers, arborists and stuff, they're not doing oak jobs unless if it's like a tree injured in a storm and it's dangerous to have by your home. They're not messing with oak trees until like end of October, November, because they don't want to mess with that kind of risk. But so that's that really fun topic. Not my favorite visits, but if you think you have it, please call me because I'd like to help you figure that out. Yeah, we're just giving you all the fun things all right in a row. Plant trees, but also some of them are dying. Beech bark disease is a insect fungal complex. So beech scale is a non-native insect that came from somewhere in like Eastern Russia. And again, being part of a global economy, we're picking up little hitchhikers. They're super fun. An invasive pest, when it shows up in our space, similar food sources from where it came from, similar climate, but not really any predators or diseases that impact that pest. And also, more importantly, the trees here may not recognize it, and so they don't have an immunoresponse for it. So you've got that like double that nothing here is really eating the thing, and the trees that are here aren't protecting or compartmentalizing themselves very well from it. So you get this scale insect. This covers a white fuzz down the barks of your beech trees, right? It's got a little straw mouth part that it's sticking under that bark to suck out the saps again, because sap is really sugary and awesome for insects. And in a heavy infestation, you get all these teeny little perforations up that tree, right? All those little minute injuries are really hard to try to seal off. And so that can expose that tree to more infections. So then there's three nectria fungal diseases. 2 of them are invasive, 1 of them's native. Doesn't matter. Either way, that tree's got all these injuries that it's sustaining, and then it further exposes it to extra disease like these different funguses. I don't often run into the fungus. Sometimes the infestations are enough because they're constantly pulling on the energy source of that tree, right? So it's jeopardizing the structural integrity of that tree. So you get beech snap from stuff like that because they're just constantly getting sucked on. They're not able to grow more rings very well, and it just becomes a really unstable, sometimes very large trees, right? And so especially again, thinking of like some climate change stuff, the storm in 2015, last year we had multiple days that were 60-mile-per-hour wind days. There are going to be ones that can get caught in that, and it snaps them in their trunk. Any other super fun lightning questions that you got about tree health things?
Any other questions? Any?
We had 6 beech, oops, sorry, we had 6 beech trees on this property that we had to fell because they were dying. You could see them dying at the top. You could find the virus on the trunk. There was an American beech where the locust tree, tree is now, sorry. The one you mentioned earlier, and I've forgotten the name of it.
The tulip tree?
Tulip tree. That was an American. Looked very well, but it wasn't. So we had to take it down, and the ones further back, because they were in danger of that snapping, and the public are using these parking lots and everything else. So we're looking for alternate trees for some of those spaces now.
Right. And as far as like thinking ahead for what you can manage around that, because like if you've got beech trees in your forest that are dying, that canopy gap can take down other neighboring trees. So depending on your forest size, people talk about salvage logging. Beech wood is not as high a quality as like sugar maple or different things, but oftentimes they'll come out and cut all the beech out of there. I have very mixed feelings about that kind of strategy, but the way I'm seeing it for northern music hardwoods, our forest type that's most covers my service area. The natural disturbance that sort of managed that with or without human influence is wind blowdown and some storm damage, right? So when those beech trees do snap and take down some things, that's a canopy gap. That can be a deer exclosure fence, and that's where people can be experimental and plant some different species that may or may not exist in their overall canopy. So there's a lot of positives that can come from this, but yeah, we're going to lose a lot of really big, awesome trees from this.
Does anybody like lion's mane mushrooms? Anybody seen those? Yes, a few nods. So I have a friend who's been having great success using locally harvested, wild harvested spores from the lion's mane mushrooms that he's already finding in our northern music hard forest and inoculating people's beech trees that have come down. And so that's what I would be doing if I had like a yard or something with you know, some prominent beech trees that had come down, or maybe I knew I needed to bring down. I would probably be inoculating them with lion's mane so that I had a yummy edible mushroom and medicine, and planting some suitable species to grow in that gap. So it's all about, yeah, being adaptive in the face of some of these, yeah, pretty depressing outcomes.
Anybody else? Anything else? Anybody on Zoom?
Oh, and I can confirm the email is correct. That salixcollective, one word, @gmail.com is correct.
Okay, that is the correct email. All right. Well, thank you very much. This
Thank
was
you all.
wonderful.